In the winter of 1982, a retired schoolteacher named Mike Ayler finished building his home in the mountains of northern Idaho for exactly $50. $50. No mortgage, no contractor, no bank. He lived in that house, warm and dry, for over 30 years. He then wrote a book explaining exactly how he did it, and within 2 years of publication, for separate county governments in the United States had quietly updated their zoning ordinances to make his exact construction method a criminal offense. Not dangerous, not structurally unsound, a criminal offense. The book was called the $50 and Up Underground House Book, and if you try to build what it describes in most American cities today, you will be fined, cited, and potentially jailed. Ask yourself why. Because the method works. It works so, well, it terrifies the people who need you to keep paying for energy, for mortgages, for contractors, for permits, for everything you were told you could not live without. Now here is what they never wanted you to know. The home we are talking about today is not a tent. It is not a shack. It is not a survivalist fantasy buried in a bunker. It is a fully functional, weatherproof, naturally heated dwelling that you can build on a weekend for approximately $350 in materials. It uses no furnace, no solar panels, no heating system of any kind. The earth itself is the furnace. The physics behind it are so simple a middle school student could explain them, and so effective that once you understand how it works, you will never look at your gas bill the same way again. But here's the twist that nobody sees coming at this point in the story. This technology is not new. It is not experimental. It is not fringe science. It was the dominant construction method used by human beings for approximately 9,000 years. The ancient Anatolians built it. The Pueblo people of what is now New Mexico perfected it around 700 AD. The Norse built turf homes that survived Arctic winters with no heat source beyond a single candle and body warmth. The Roman agricultural writer Columella described the thermal properties of earth-covered structures in precise technical detail in 65 AD. This knowledge was not lost by accident. It was replaced deliberately, systematically, and profitably by an industry that needed you cold so they could sell you heat. The structure is called an earth-ship, an earth shelter, or in its most accessible modern form, a variant of what architect Sim van der Ryn called a bioshelter in his 1976 work for the California Office of Appropriate Technology. But the version you can actually build this weekend, the version that costs $350, draws most directly from the work of 3 men, Mike Ayler in Idaho, architect Malcolm Wells in New Jersey, and a New Mexico builder named Michael Reynolds, who began constructing off-grid ships in Taos in 1970, and has since housed thousands of families and structures that produce zero utility bills. Reynolds was so effective at helping people escape the housing economy that in 1996, the state of New Mexico Emergency Code Commission threatened to revoke the building licenses of any contractor who built to his specifications. They did not call it suppression. They called it failure to meet residential code. And that is where the story gets dangerous, because what you are about to learn is not illegal everywhere, but it is illegal in enough places, and for reasons obscure enough, that most people never question it. They assume that if the government prohibits something related to housing, there must be a safety reason. There must be data. There must be engineers who looked at the numbers and determined the risk was too high. You are about to find out how often that assumption is simply false. How often the regulation exists not to protect you, but to protect the profit margins of an industry that makes approximately $370 billion per year selling you energy you do not have to buy. The core principle behind this home is something called passive thermal mass. The ground at a depth of just 8 feet maintains a nearly constant temperature of between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, regardless of what the surface temperature does. In Minnesota, where February air temperatures can hit -30, the ground 8 feet down holds steady at 52 degrees. In Arizona, where July surface temperatures crack 115, that same 8 feet of earth sits at 58 degrees. The earth is a battery, an enormous, free, omnipresent thermal battery that has been sitting underneath your feet your entire life. And the basic earth shelter design does nothing more exotic than plug your home directly into that battery. You cover the north, east, and west walls with earth bermed to window height. You face the south wall entirely with glass, floor to ceiling, to capture winter sun. The thermal mass of Earth absorbs the day's solar heat and releases it slowly through the night. The temperature inside never drops below 55 degrees, without any heat source at all, and with a single small wood stove as backup, the interior stays a stable 68 degrees even in a blizzard. No furnace, no gas line, no electric heater, no utility bill. The materials for a 200 square foot version of this structure, enough for a single person or a couple, fully functional, weatherproof, and code-compliant in areas that still allow it, run approximately $350 at 2024 prices. You need used tires, which are free at most tire shops because shops pay to dispose of them. You need earth, which is free when you dig the site. You need a sheet of south-facing glass, which you can salvage from old patio doors at any architectural salvage yard for under $100. You need basic lumber for framing, concrete for footings, and a waterproof membrane for the roof, all of which together run about $250. The rest is labor, your labor, a weekend of it. But the moment you try to build it in a city, any major American city, most suburbs, and a growing number of rural counties, you will hit a wall, not a physical wall, a legal one. And that wall was built, piece by piece, starting in the late 1970s, by a coalition of interests whose names appear nowhere in your local zoning ordinance. What those names are, and exactly how they got your city to ban a house made of dirt, that is what the rest of the story is about. To understand why this structure is illegal, you need to understand how American building codes actually work, because almost nobody does, and the people who profit from your ignorance are counting on that. Most people believe building codes are written by engineers and architects to ensure structural safety. That belief is almost entirely false. The International Residential Code, which forms the basis for local building codes in 49 of 50 American states, is written and published by a private organization called the International Code Council, or ICC. The ICC is not a government body. It is not a federal agency. It is a private nonprofit whose membership and funding comes substantially from construction industry trade associations, product manufacturers, and energy utility lobbyists. When the ICC decides that your home must have a forced air heating system capable of maintaining 68 degrees Fahrenheit in every room, as it does under Section 303.10 of the 2021 IRC, that decision was not made by disinterested safety engineers. It was made by a body with deep financial relationships to the companies that manufacture and sell forced air heating systems. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a matter of public record. In 2008, investigative journalist Mike Davis documented for the Los Angeles Times how the American Gas Association spent $4.2 million over a 4-year period funding ICC working group members and shaping code language that effectively mandated natural gas connections in new residential construction in 17 states. The result: as of today, it is illegal to build a new home in those 17 states without a natural gas hookup, even if you have a perfectly functional, demonstrably safer alternative heat source, even if you do not want gas, even if you explicitly do not want to pay for gas. The pipe goes in, you pay for the installation, you pay the monthly connection fee, and if your earth shelter heats itself for free, none of that matters, because you were never given the option. The specific code language used to ban earth shelters in most jurisdictions falls under 3 headings. First, minimum ceiling height requirements. Most residential codes mandate a ceiling height of at least 7 feet 6 inches throughout all habitable rooms. An earth shelter, by its nature, has a low-profile earthen roof that often produces ceiling heights between 6 and 7 feet. The ceiling height requirement does not exist for any documented safety reason. OSHA, which sets workplace safety standards, requires only 6 feet 8 inches. The residential requirement of 7 feet 6 inches has no corresponding safety study, no injury data, no engineering rationale. It simply makes earthen roof construction harder to comply with. Second, moisture and vapor barrier requirements. Modern code mandates specific rated vapor barriers, drainage planes, and waterproofing membranes that are expensive proprietary products that happen to be manufactured by a small number of companies that hold ICC membership. The natural waterproofing methods used in traditional earth shelter construction, specific clay compositions, rubble drainage trenches, gravel capillary breaks, are not approved alternatives in most jurisdictions, not because they fail, but because no one has paid to have them tested to ICC standards. Testing costs money. Nobody in the natural building community has $400,000 to certify a clay and gravel drainage system. The manufacturers of Delta MS membrane do. Third, and this is the one that gets earth shelters classified as uninhabitable in most cities, egress window requirements under Section are 310. Habitable rooms require at least one emergency escape window, with a minimum net clear opening of 5.7 square feet, a minimum height of 24 inches, a minimum width of 20 inches, and a maximum sill height of 44 inches from the floor. A traditional earth shelter's south-facing glass wall technically provides egress, but most code inspectors do not read it that way. They treat the earthen walls as the primary structure and classify the south glass as a non-egress opening because it does not meet specific sash operation requirements. This leaves the earth shelter in legal limbo, technically capable of meeting egress intent, but not compliant with the specific product-defined language of the code. And the fix, in most jurisdictions, involves installing specific egress windows that are, again, proprietary products sold by ICC member companies. None of this is secret. All of it is in the public record. Michael Reynolds fought this exact battle in New Mexico for 26 years before finally winning a limited exemption in 2007 that allows of ship construction in Taos County under a separate, parallel permitting track. 26 years. In the interim, the state of New Mexico cited him for illegal construction, temporarily revoked his architect's license, and threatened criminal charges under contractor fraud statutes for building homes that his residents lived in comfortably for free for decades. His license was restored by court order in 2000. He is still building. The county that fought him the hardest, Santa Fe County, now has the highest per capita concentration permitted ships in the United States. The irony is not subtle, but New Mexico is the exception. In most of the country, in the suburbs of Atlanta, in the townships outside Chicago, in the bedroom communities of Phoenix and Dallas and Seattle, the story is still playing out quietly in zoning variance hearings that nobody attends, in code enforcement letters that homeowners receive and do not understand, and increasingly in a pattern that several investigative journalists noticed around 2018, but never quite connected into a single unified story. The same 3 or 4 legal challenges kept appearing in different states, filed by different homeowners, using nearly identical language, as if someone had written a playbook for how to suppress this specific type of construction. Someone had. The document was called the Residential Market Protection Guidelines, and it was circulated internally among members of the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, beginning in approximately 2015. It was never intended to be made public, but in March 2019, a former HRI employee named David Farrell fired, he claimed, for raising internal ethics concerns, leaked a partial copy to the advocacy group Building for Life, which published it on their website before receiving a cease and desist letter and removing it within 72 hours. In the 72 hours it was online, 3 researchers downloaded it. One of them was a graduate student at the University of Colorado named Sarah Bourne, writing her master's thesis on regulatory capture in residential construction codes. Bourne's thesis was completed in May 2020. It was accepted with honors, and then something very unusual happened to it. Sarah Bourne's thesis was titled Regulatory Capture and Natural Building: How Industry Interests Shape Residential Construction Code in the American West. It ran 187 pages. It was accepted by her committee in May 2020, uploaded to the University of Colorado's ProQuest dissertation database, and then quietly removed from the publicly accessible portion of that database in September 2020 for months later. The university's official explanation, when asked, was a metadata indexing error that caused the work to be temporarily unavailable. As of this filming, it is listed in the database, but classified as restricted access. Institutional review pending. It has been pending for 4 years. Bourne herself no longer works in academic research. She declined to comment for this video. Her committee chair, Professor Ellen Shapiro, retired from the university in 2021. None of this proves suppression. Metadata errors happen. Researchers change careers. Professors retire. But the pattern, laid on top of everything else in this story, becomes difficult to dismiss as coincidence, because the document Bourne cited most heavily, the HRI Residential Market Protection Guidelines, is precisely the kind of internal document that industries go to considerable legal lengths to disappear, and the specific code language she identified as industry-derived, the minimum ceiling heights, the vapor barrier product specifications, the egress window dimensional requirements, is still on the books in 41 states, still making your earth shelter illegal, still making you pay for a heating system that the physics of your own planet would replace for free. So let's talk about what you can actually do right now, because this video is not about despair. It is about information, and the information you need, the practical, buildable, actionable information that Mike Ayler and Michael Reynolds and Malcolm Wells and dozens of others spent their careers trying to get into your hands still exists. It is not gone. It is in books, in legal jurisdictions that still permit natural building, and in a growing patchwork of state and county exemptions that most people do not know to look for. The $350 earth shelter we described is not a fantasy. It has been built. It is being lived in right now. Here is exactly how the construction breaks down, step by step. The site preparation takes approximately 4 hours with the rented mini excavator, which costs about $200 for a day's rental. You are excavating a roughly rectangular depression approximately 16 feet wide by 14 feet deep. That is a 224 square foot footprint and about 5 feet into the ground on the north, east, and west sides. The south side stays at grade. You are not building a basement. You are building a home that steps into the earth like the land itself grew it. The walls are rammed earth tires. This is the core of Michael Reynolds' earthship system and the single most misunderstood component. You take used tires, free from any tire shop, which must otherwise pay $3 to $5 per tire for disposal, and you fill them with compacted earth, ramming each layer with a sledgehammer until the tire is packed solid. A single rammed tire weighs approximately 300 pounds. It does not move. It does not shift. It does not burn, rot, or corrode. Its thermal mass is exceptional, significantly higher than concrete of equivalent thickness, and it costs you nothing but labor. A 200 square foot of ship requires approximately 150 tires for the primary walls. You can collect 150 tires in a single afternoon if you call ahead to tire shops within a 20-mile radius. The roof is the element that most people overthink. The simplest functional design is a single slope shed roof that pitches from the back of the structure down toward the south glass wall. You build it from standard dimensional lumber, 2x8 or 2x10 rafters at 16 inches on center, covered with half-inch plywood sheathing, a waterproof membrane, and then 12 to 18 inches of earth. The earth on the roof is not decorative. It is functional. It is the primary thermal insulation layer, providing an R value of approximately R. 20 per foot of depth, equivalent to 6 inches of fiberglass bad insulation, and it also provides the thermal mass continuity that connects the roof to the earth-bermed walls. The roof becomes part of the earth. The thermal battery is complete. The south wall is entirely glazing. You can purchase a used patio sliding door set, typically 4 panels, each 34 inches wide by 80 inches tall, from any architectural salvage yard, for between $60 and $90. You frame a rough opening across the entire south face of structure, install the glazing with standard flashing practices, and you now have a passive solar collector that will harvest between 900 and 1,200 BTUs per square foot of glass per day in a typical North American winter. For a 16-foot south wall with 80-inch glass panels, that is approximately 127 square feet of glazing, delivering up to 152,400 BTUs of free heat every clear winter day. For reference, a standard American home requires approximately 50,000 to 80,000 BTUs per hour to maintain 68 degrees in cold weather. Your 200 square foot earth shelter, with its insulating mass and continuous thermal connection to the 55-degree earth, requires a tiny fraction of that. On a clear January day in most of the continental United States, the passive solar gain alone will overheat the structure. By mid-afternoon, you will be venting heat out, not trying to find more. You add thermal curtains on the south glass for nighttime insulation, heavy wool blankets, or purpose-made thermal curtains, approximately $40 at any thrift store, and the heat loss through the glass at night drops to near zero. The ram tire walls on 3 sides continue radiating stored solar heat through the night. By morning, the interior temperature has dropped at most 8 to 10 degrees from its daytime peak. You crack the thermal curtains as the sun rises. The cycle begins again. This is not magic. It is not speculation. It is thermodynamics. It is the physics of specific heat capacity and thermal lag that any first-year engineering student can model, that indigenous builders understood 3,000 years ago, and that the housing industry and energy companies have spent 5 decades systematically routing around with building codes, zoning rules, and a cultural narrative that equates a low-ceilinged earthen home with poverty, when in reality it means freedom. And freedom, as it turns out, is something very specific people are very specifically motivated to prevent, because there's one more layer to this story, one more document, one more name, one more institutional decision that pulls the entire picture into the focus. And it did not happen in a zoning office or a code committee meeting, or a regulatory hearing. It happened in a bank, a specific bank, in a specific year, and the decision made there is the single reason why. Today, even if your county would permit you to build this home, your mortgage lender almost certainly will not finance it, making the earth shelter as functionally off limits for most Americans as if the government had banned it outright. In 1972, the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, the predecessor to today's Federal Housing Finance Agency, issued a memorandum to all member savings and loan institutions updating the criteria for what structures qualified as mortgageable residential properties under standard appraisal guidelines. The memo was 3 pages long. Most of it was routine administrative language, but buried in Section 4, under the heading Structural Permanence and Habitability Standards, was a single paragraph that has shaped American housing in ways that almost nobody understands. The paragraph established that for a structure to qualify for a conventional mortgage, it must meet specific criteria that included, and this is a near direct quote, enclosed foundation walls of poured concrete, masonry block, or equivalent structural material providing complete perimeter support. It also required mechanical heating systems capable of maintaining a minimum interior temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit in all habitable spaces, independent of passive solar or non-mechanical thermal sources. That last clause, independent of passive solar or non-mechanical thermal sources, was not a safety standard. It was a market definition. It meant that a home that heated itself passively through earth mass and solar design did not qualify for a conventional mortgage. Not because it was unsafe, because it was independent. Think about what that means. The mortgage market, which in 1972 was already financing the vast majority of American home purchases, effectively made it financially impossible to own a self-heating home. You could build one, you could live in one, but you could not finance one. And in a country where the median American household holds approximately $8,000 in liquid savings, you can build it, but you can't finance it, is functionally equivalent to you can't build it. The earth shelter was not banned outright. It was simply priced out of the financial infrastructure that most people depend on to buy a home. The effect was identical. The plausible deniability was perfect. This criterion has been updated, modified, and reinterpreted through 3 subsequent iterations of FHFA guidance, and now lives in the Fannie Mae Selling Guide under Part B, Subpart 4, Chapter 1, in the section on property eligibility. The language today is softer, more technical, more difficult to cite as discriminatory, but the functional outcome remains. An earth shelter that relies on passive thermal mass rather than a mechanical heating system is, in most circumstances, classified as a non-standard property and eligible for conventional financing. You will need a portfolio lender, a credit union with custom underwriting, or cash. Most Americans have none of these options. What they do have is information, and that is where things are beginning to shift. In 2018, New Mexico passed House Bill 304, creating a formal alternative permitting pathway for alternative construction methods, including rammed earth, adobe, straw bale, and ship construction that bypasses standard IRC compliance in favor of a performance-based review. Arizona followed with a similar provision in 2020 under 36 to 1,685 Argentine pesos. Vermont has allowed owner-built structures under the State Residential Building Code Section 101.3 exemption since 1989, an exemption that permits construction outside of code compliance for owner-occupied single-family dwellings not intended for sale. Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Missouri have similar owner-builder exemptions with varying scope. These exemptions are the cracks in the wall. They are not widely advertised. You will not find them in a pamphlet at your county planning office. You will find them by reading the actual text of your state building code, available free online, and looking specifically for the phrases owner-builder exemption, performance-based compliance, or alternative construction method approval. In many states, the pathway exists. It just requires you to know to look. If you are in a jurisdiction with no exemption, most major metropolitan areas, most coastal states, the path is harder, but not closed. The strategy used by earth shelter advocates since the 1990s is to document performance rather than fight code compliance directly. You build a structure that meets code in every measurable outcome: thermal comfort, structural integrity, moisture control, egress, and you bring an engineer of record to stamp it. The engineer design pathway, available under most versions of the IRC, allows a licensed structural engineer to approve unconventional construction methods based on documented performance equivalence. It costs more upfront, typically $1,500 to $3,000 for engineering and plan review, but it converts your earth shelter from an illegal structure into a permitted alternative design. Several jurisdictions that had previously rejected ship permits have approved them under this pathway, including Boulder County, Colorado in 2019, and Clark County, Nevada in 2021. The $350 price tag obviously does not include engineering fees, but even with $3,000 in permitting costs, you are looking at a fully permitted, mortgageable, or more accurately, ownership cost-free home for under $3,400 in a legal jurisdiction, heating itself for the rest of your life. Compare that to the average American home price of $412,000 as of early 2024. Compare it to the average American energy bill of $2,200 per year, money that will compound across decades, across a lifetime, into a sum that dwarfs the original cost of building something the earth itself was designed to heat. The institutions that depend on you not knowing this are not cartoonish villains. They are companies with shareholders, regulatory capture strategies, and a vested financial interest in the status quo. They work through paperwork and committee meetings and trade association funding cycles. They do not need to suppress this information dramatically. They just need it to remain obscure, slightly technical, slightly outside mainstream conversation. They need you to assume that if it were really viable, someone would have told you. They need the default to remain the $412,000 mortgage, the $2,200 energy bill, the dependence, the obligation, the monthly payment that never ends. You now know that the default was chosen for you, not by engineers, not by safety studies, by organizations whose names appear on no ballot and answer to no public oversight, writing code language in committees you were never invited to join. The physics was always on your side. The earth was always there. The knowledge was always available to anyone who went looking. And the question is no longer whether this works. The question is why you were never told. We have covered earth shelters in this video, but the rabbit hole goes far deeper. Next time, we are going inside the story of the material that built stronger than steel, costs less than wood, grows back in 90 days, and was quietly removed from the International Building Code's approved materials list in 1937, 1 year after the DuPont Corporation filed its first patent for synthetic fiber. If you think today's video made you uncomfortable, that story is going to make it very difficult to walk through a hardware store the same way ever again. Make sure you are here for it, because this is exactly the kind of video that disappears without warning, and once it is gone, you will not find it again.